In 1993, a first-grade classroom in a quiet Pennsylvania elementary school was supposed to be a safe haven of alphabet charts, storybooks, and finger paints. Instead, it became the ground zero for a calculated campaign of terror involving death threats, explicit imagery, and human waste. On one side of the hallway was a wildly popular, creative teacher whose life was being systematically dismantled by an anonymous monster. On the other side was a strict, old-school colleague who seemed to have a terrifying, secret grudge. But as the local police and even federal investigators poured into the school to stop the madness, they quickly realized that every single piece of evidence in this suburban nightmare pointed toward a reality that made absolutely no sense. Just a quick heads up before the story begins. Every single name, location, and piece of evidence you're about to hear is completely real, taken directly from public federal court transcripts and official police records. None of the details have been fictionalized or altered for drama. Because of the serious nature of these real-world events, viewer discretion is advised as we walk through the exact steps of the case. In the summer of 1993, police officers in Monroe County, Pennsylvania, were called to investigate a highly unusual and escalating security threat at the Coolbaugh Learning Center. The elementary school, nestled in a quiet community within the Pocono Mountain School District, had suddenly become the epicenter of a vicious, anonymous harassment campaign. The target was Joanne Chambers, a 41-year-old first-grade teacher known for her vibrant, modern, and highly popular teaching style. The campaign did not begin with direct threats sent to Chambers herself. Instead, the anonymous antagonist mailed letters directly to the elementary school's principal. The early correspondence weaponized highly damaging and fabricated professional rumors, claiming that Chambers had brought marijuana into the school building and bragged about it to colleagues. Local police departments and school administrators initially treated the letters as a severe workplace grievance or the actions of a disgruntled parent trying to ruin a teacher's reputation. However, the scope of the investigation quickly widened as the letters began arriving at Chambers' private residence, the school building, and even the mailboxes of fellow faculty members. The content grew increasingly graphic, featuring vulgar insults, sexual threats, and explicit vows of physical violence against Chambers. Recognizing the psychological toll the ordeal was taking on the teacher, investigators sought patterns within the physical evidence. Because the writer possessed an intimate, detailed knowledge of the school's daily schedules, staff dynamics, and internal administrative procedures, law enforcement personnel concluded that the perpetrator was almost certainly an employee working inside the Coolbaugh Learning Center. The breakthrough that local detectives were searching for appeared to arrive tucked inside one of the anonymous mailings. In a letter sent to the school administration, the writer referred to the principal by the specific derogatory nickname, Colonel Clink, a reference to the bumbling, strict fictional camp commandant from the 1960s television sitcom Hogan's Heroes. Seeking to identify who might use such a specific reference, investigators interviewed school staff members. A faculty member stepped forward with a critical lead, informing detectives that another first-grade teacher at the school, Paula Naraki, had previously used that exact nickname to describe the principal behind his back. This revelation fundamentally altered the trajectory of the police investigation. Naraki, who utilized a much more traditional, strict, and old-school approach to teaching, emerged as the primary suspect. Investigators hypothesized that professional jealousy and deep-seated resentment toward Chambers' immense popularity among students and parents provided a strong, plausible motive. While Naraki vehemently denied any involvement and expressed complete bewilderment over the accusations, the surrounding evidence continued to stack up against her, driven heavily by an escalating series of hostile acts occurring right inside the school building. The harassment escalated to shocking, bizarre extremes that shocked the local community and intensified the pressure on law enforcement. Chambers reported to administrators that someone had broken into her classroom desk, stolen personal belongings, and planted a hidden bottle of whiskey in her drawer to make her look like an alcoholic. Not long after, Chambers claimed she walked into her classroom and discovered human feces deliberately smeared across her desk and teacher's chair. The campaign then expanded outside the school walls to target the broader community and the families of the young children enrolled in the district. The perpetrator obtained a photograph of Chambers, carefully cut out her face, and pasted it onto an explicit nude image sourced from an adult magazine. Photocopies of this doctored image were scattered across the schoolyard where elementary students could easily pick them up. Furthermore, copies were mailed directly to the homes of the students' parents and pasted onto the storefront glass of a local grocery store for the general public to see. Simultaneously, anonymous telephone calls were placed to parents, falsely claiming that Chambers was a lesbian who was actively living with AIDS and should not be allowed near young children. Confronted with a 10-month investigation that was rapidly spiraling out of control, local authorities, with the assistance of federal investigators, decided to utilize polygraph examinations, commonly known as lie detector tests, to break the deadlock between the two teachers. Law enforcement requested that both Chambers and Naraki sit for the evaluations. In the legal and scientific communities, polygraphs are widely recognized as pseudoscience. They measure physiological stress responses like heart rate, blood pressure, and respiration rather than actual truthfulness, which is why their results are generally inadmissible as evidence in a court of law. Despite their inherent scientific unreliability, the outcomes of these tests completely solidified the biases of the investigators. Chambers successfully passed her polygraph examination, showing no signs of physiological stress when questioned. Conversely, Naraki, who was under immense professional and personal pressure as the prime suspect in a horrific crime, failed her examination. For the police, this was the definitive confirmation they needed. They were now entirely convinced that Naraki was the mastermind behind the campaign. Armed with what they believed was a clear direction, detectives secured search warrants for Naraki's home. Police technicians seized her personal papers, writing materials, and family typewriters, hoping to forensically match the mechanical impressions of the keys to the typed characters on the anonymous envelopes and threatening notes. However, forensic analysis yielded a significant obstacle for the prosecution. Extensive testing by state laboratory experts concluded that none of the equipment seized from Naraki's home could be linked to the creation of the letters. To defuse the escalating workplace tension and protect Chambers, school board officials made the decision to formally transfer Chambers to a completely different elementary school building within the Pocono Mountain School District. Yet the relocation failed to stop the bizarre incidents. Shortly after arriving at her new assignment, Chambers reported finding a graphic threat left on the doorstep of the new school building. Inside a pink shoebox was a Barbie doll that had been modified to match Chambers' hair and clothing style. Its plastic neck had been slashed with a razor blade and coated in wet red paint to simulate blood, accompanied by an explicit typed death threat. The climax of the police investigation occurred shortly thereafter when Chambers reported a dangerous traffic incident. She claimed to investigators that while she was driving on a local roadway, Naraki suddenly pulled her own vehicle alongside her and aggressively forced Chambers' car completely off the road. This alleged physical assault provided law enforcement with the necessary legal threshold of probable cause to secure an arrest warrant. Naraki was arrested and hit with over 100 criminal counts, including stalking, terroristic threats, harassment, and reckless endangerment. The school district immediately suspended her from her teaching position. Following her arrest, Naraki maintained her innocence and refused to accept a plea deal for a crime she insisted she did not commit. While out on bail, she and her family exhausted their personal finances, spending thousands of dollars to hire a dedicated private investigator and experienced defense attorneys to look into the state's case. The defense team shifted their focus directly toward the physical evidence that the police had largely overlooked: the original envelopes and postage stamps used to mail the threatening letters. The private investigator pushed for advanced forensic testing on the back of the postage stamps, recognizing that whoever sent the letters had to lick the stamps to adhere them to the envelopes. Laboratory technicians successfully isolated usable, partial DNA profiles from the dried saliva preserved beneath the adhesive surfaces of the stamps. When the laboratory compared this genetic data against Naraki, the results provided a definitive exclusion. The DNA did not match Naraki or anyone in her family. To identify the true source of the biological material, the defense team initiated a covert operation. They tracked Chambers' household waste removal, legally recovering discarded items from her trash to harvest comparative family DNA samples. The independent laboratory analyzed the genetic material from the trash and achieved a perfect match. The saliva found on the stamps used to terrorize Chambers belonged to Chambers herself. Faced with this explosive revelation, prosecutors scrambled to salvage their case, refusing to drop the charges immediately. They claimed that perhaps a third party had framed Chambers or that the sample was contaminated. In response, Chambers volunteered to provide an official blood sample for a secondary state-controlled DNA test. The second round of genetic testing confirmed the initial findings with absolute mathematical certainty. Investigators unraveled an even darker history when they looked into Chambers' professional past. Background checks revealed that before arriving at the Coolbaugh Learning Center, Chambers had worked at several other schools, and every single transfer was preceded by remarkably similar, unverified reports of anonymous harassment, phantom fires, alleged office break-ins, and instances where feces were smeared on her workspace. Chambers had spent years suffering from a severe psychological pathology, staging elaborate, high-stakes crimes against herself to garner sympathy, control her employment transfers, and systematically destroy the lives of colleagues she disliked. The criminal case against Naraki completely collapsed, and all 100-plus charges against her were formally dismissed. The aftermath of the investigation shifted entirely into civil courtrooms as Naraki launched a series of massive lawsuits aimed at recovering her reputation and penalizing those responsible for the catastrophic failure of justice. She filed civil suits against Chambers for malicious defamation, the Pocono Mountain School District for administrative negligence, and the local police department for civil rights violations and investigative misconduct. The legal battles concluded with mixed results but significant financial restitution for the exonerated teacher. Chambers chose to settle her portion of the lawsuit privately, paying Naraki $25,000. The school district, recognizing their severe liability for suspending an innocent employee based on unverified workplace allegations and a flawed internal investigation, agreed to a massive financial settlement paying Naraki $600,000. However, the lawsuit against the police department went all the way to a formal court trial. The court ultimately ruled in favor of the law enforcement agency, finding that while the initial police response and reliance on polygraph data were deeply flawed, the officers had acted within the technical boundaries of probable cause based on the witness statements and circumstantial evidence available to them at the time. The police department was cleared of legal liability, leaving the financial settlements from Chambers and the school board as Naraki's primary legal victory, drawing a close to one of the most bizarre cases of self-stalking and institutional framing in American history.